Hey there. So I just have a short little thing I wanted to talk to you about, just to try to give you some examples related to the topics that we've been discussing that I think is relevant and certainly might be relevant to you. Just some brief examples. So let me just go over those real quick. Basically talking about genetic screening. And this is sort of becoming very important in medicine, where we can look at a patient's DNA and understand their genetic history better and have a better ability to predict some diseases that they might have, or a better ability to understand what they have and things like that. And so as we learn more about the genetic basis of a lot of diseases or disorders, we can start testing for them. Now, this is not to advocate for this general, let's test for everything and let's worry about every potential disease we got. That's not a healthy way to use this genetic screening. What I'm trying to give you is some examples of ways that we can use this without making yourself crazy worrying about every potential disease that you might have. The first is just kind of a neat example that's more recent, kind of recent, not that recent. Looking at ALS, which is also commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. And so some researchers sequenced DNA from people that had ALS and those that don't have ALS, and were able to identify a mutated allele that's more common in those with ALS. Now, what's interesting about this is the research was funded partially by money raised with the Ice Bucket Challenge. And so I know this was 2 or 3 years ago, which is an eternity in internet time. But if you remember the Ice Bucket Challenge, it just kind of went crazy for a month or two. And the ultimate goal of it was to try to raise awareness and try to raise money. And they did raise money, and this is what they put some of that money toward. They were able to fund this kind of research. And so again, what they found is a mutated NEK1 allele. So the NEK1 gene, they found a mutated version of this gene that was more common in people that had ALS. And so that's sort of the first step of identifying what causes this disorder. So what does that gene do? Well, that gene does a lot of things, and so one of the things I found out it does, it's been linked to several cellular functions, including cilia formation, DNA damage response, microtubule stability, neuronal morphology, and axonal polarity. And so that last part, neuronal morphology, axonal polarity, that's has to do with nerves. And ALS is a degenerative nerve disease. And so the fact that they were able to find a unique allele associated with nerves, and it was more common in people that had ALS, that's starting to put some pieces of the puzzle together. And so that's just an interesting thing. So that's, there's no gene therapy for that. There's still a long way toward really understanding and treating the disease, but that's a very important first step, and it's very useful for genetic screening. Okay, so let me give you another example of the potential benefits of targeted genetic screening. And so this is a gene called MTHFR, and that stands for methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. And you may have noticed, or maybe you've not noticed, but anytime the name of something ends in ACE, it's usually an enzyme. And this is an enzyme that your body produces. This gene is found on chromosome number 1, and we know exactly where on the gene. If you look at this diagram of chromosome 1, it's way out toward the end of chromosome 1. So like all genes, it codes for RNA, which codes for a protein. The protein in this example is an enzyme, which helps chemical reactions. And so this enzyme helps to convert homocysteine to methionine or cysteine. And those are just important molecules in your cells. I think they're amino acids or forms of amino acids. But it's just an important reaction that takes place in your cells. And this enzyme needs folic acid as a cofactor. What does that mean? A cofactor is a molecule that helps an enzyme hold its shape, basically. And so many vitamins, for example, are cofactors. And so maybe you take a multivitamin, you're aware of different kinds of vitamins. What do vitamins do for you? Often they act as cofactors. And so it's just a molecule that helps a protein hold its shape. Remember, shape is really important to proteins. And so some proteins need other molecules to help them hold their shape. Another good example is iron is sort of a cofactor for hemoglobin. And you're familiar that iron is important for your blood, and they test for iron in your blood. Well, that's why. It helps hemoglobin hold its shape. And so folic acid is a cofactor for this MTHFR protein. Now, there's a common mutation of this gene that forms a new allele. And this mutation is a point mutation. It changes a cytosine to a thymine at base number 677. So we know, like, that's, again, the advantage of understanding how all this works, is you can pinpoint exactly what changes in the DNA. And so that forms the C67T allele, right? C changed to T at base 677. So it's a new form of this gene. And that particular point mutation causes an amino acid substitution. And so the DNA is changed, it changes the RNA, and in this instance, it actually changes the amino acid at that location. Substitutes a valine for an alanine. And so if someone is homozygous for this mutated allele, so if they have two copies of this mutant or mutated allele, then that often is correlated with homocysteine building up in the blood. Remember, this gene's job is to break down homocysteine. But if you have two of these alleles, you don't break down homocysteine as well. Well, so what? What's the problem with high homocysteine levels? There's been a lot of problems associated with high homocysteine in the blood. Lots to do with like blood clotting. And this high homocysteine in the blood has been linked to things like spina bifida, miscarriages, a lot of different types of birth defects. And so it's possible that these birth defects, which are related to high homocysteine levels, are also related to this mutant allele, because this mutant allele means you don't break down homocysteine very well. Now, you can compensate for these alleles that don't work as well. The enzyme doesn't break homocysteine down as well. You can compensate that by adding extra folic acid in the diet. Remember, folic acid acts as a cofactor for this MTHFR enzyme. And so if you have these mutant alleles, but you take more folic acid, that can sort of help those enzymes that don't work as well, and your homocysteine levels can come down. Well, this might be one reason why pregnant women are encouraged to take folic acid. So this has been known for a long time that if pregnant women take more folic acid, they tend to have fewer miscarriages and birth defects. And so this might be one of the reasons. Usually when your prenatal vitamins have extra high doses of folic acid, because that's been shown to reduce birth defects a long time ago. Well, this might be why it reduces those birth defects, because it's compensating for people who have this defective allele. Okay, so why do I care so much about MTHFR in this gene? Well, this is why. This guy right here. And so this is my nephew, Jake, my sister's son. And this is me holding him when he was, I'm going to guess he was maybe a year and a half old here. And if you look at Jake, and look at this picture, you might notice something interesting about his eyes in this picture. You see he's got the red eye that you get sometimes from a photograph, but he's only got red eye in one eye and not in the other one. That's because his other eye is a prosthetic eye. And this is Jake right after he was born. He was born a couple months premature, and he had only one eye, and he had some toes fused together, and he had his intestines had several blockages. And so when he was like a day or two old, he had to have surgery to cut out those blockages and stitch the intestine back together. Now this is on a preemie, and it's a very complicated surgery, and I can't say enough about, you know, the surgeons that were able to do this, and you know, were able to connect his intestine back together. And so here's a picture of Jake, just taken a few days ago. My sister posted on Facebook, and he's going to be getting his learner's permit. So he's doing great. So from being born 2 months premature with lots of issues, you know, he's healthy, and good golly, he's going to be driving soon, which makes me feel old. At any rate, the point is, first off, again, I can't say enough about the doctors and surgeons who were able to treat him. But once this all settled down, the question became, well, what happened here? And all these things, the eye, the intestine, the toes, they're not really closely related. So the doctors begin to ask, what would cause all these issues in a developing fetus? And often, those are related to blood clots and some sort of blood clots being thrown at sort of random intervals in the developing fetus and causing things to not develop the way they're expected. And so you start looking at things that are related to blood clotting, and so then you start looking at things like homocysteine levels. And my sister and my brother-in-law got tested and found that this may have been related to this MTHFR gene. And so consequently, right when we were kind of figuring this out, that maybe that had something to do with Jake, my wife got pregnant. And so because we had this potential issue in our family, we got tested for this specific gene. And it turns out that I'm heterozygous for that mutant allele. I have one copy of that mutant allele, and the other one is a normal allele. My wife also is heterozygous. She has one copy of that mutant allele, and she has another different mutant allele, which does another amino acid substitution. But with that amino acid substitution, it doesn't seem to change the shape of the protein much. It doesn't seem to affect its function. So consequently, you know, there's a chance that our daughter could have these mutant alleles, but also there's a chance that, you know, my wife has high homocysteine levels. So consequently, she was put on ridiculously high dosage of folic acid while she was pregnant, much higher than typical, and she had to take blood thinners her entire pregnancy. So every day she had to give herself a shot in the stomach with these blood thinners to try to avoid this potential blood clotting and to avoid any potential problems. And you know, our daughter was born healthy, and our daughter's fine. She's 13 now. But the point is we were screened because of my nephew, because we thought that we might have this in our history, and that allowed us to anticipate potential problems and take proactive measures, and that's good medicine. Again, I want to point out that this was a specific reason for testing, and you know, I would advocate for that versus a shotgun approach. And it seems like we can, you know, test for everything now, and you start to think, well, I'm likely to get this, and I'm likely to get this, and it's much more complicated than that. But there's enormous promise with this sort of medicine because we understand the genetics behind a lot of these diseases now. So anyway, that's just an example from my life, and this is only going to get more common, but this is the sort of thing that I think it's important for you to know, because this is going to happen to all of us, and this is where medicine is going to grow. But I also want to point out that this is why we need people in med school. This is why we need people researching. This is why we need to put money toward this kind of research, because we'll all benefit from it. And this is why I want you to understand protein synthesis and this whole procedure, because it helps you understand these sorts of issues, which we're all going to face at some point in our life. So anyway, that's just a couple of examples. Let me know if you got any questions. I'll see you later.